Thanks for joining us today. This is our Getting Started webinar series. So kicking this off today, first I have a quick slide about Mapbox. I'm sure you're familiar if you've already signed up for this webinar. But in addition to maps, we also do search, navigation, and data, of course. So there's plenty more to explore in the Mapbox ecosystem. So we welcome you to check out our website and see all the amazing things that we're up to. But today we're going to start with just the very beginning, very basics of how to get started with web mapping. So my name's Chris. I'm a developer evangelist at Mapbox. In the past, I've been worn the title of civic hacker. Been a Mapbox developer working with Mapbox tools for probably like 8 years now. I also teach web mapping. And in the past, I've also been an outreach engineer and a solutions architect and lots of other things. So happy to be talking to you today about Mapbox. And if you want to get in touch with me, the easiest way to do it is on Twitter at this tweet handle. So moving on, today, what we're going to do is cover getting started with Mapbox GL.js. So very simply, we're going to load a basic web map using a Mapbox example. So I really want to accentuate how important the examples are and how useful they can be, especially for beginners. We're going to modify the code from the example and set the initial view of the map and modify some of the way that it sets up and initializes. Next, we're going to try some different Mapbox core styles. So lots of different choices you have for how you want to make the map customized to the kind of data or story that you're trying to tell. Then we're going to get into adding a marker, and then we're going to customize that marker. So it'll be some live coding, but this is just the beginning. So we're not bringing in tons of data. We're not doing lots of interactivity. We'll get to that in later episodes. Today, we're going to focus on fundamentals and just get something working on the page so we can build from there. We're also going to have Q&A, and you can add questions to the chat. I have a coworker, Lisa, who's working in the chat right now, who can kind of keep an eye on things, and she'll curate your questions and make sure that they end up in a document that I can go through at the end when we do some Q&A at the end. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Okay, so let's get moving. I'll come back to this presentation, but first things first, we're going to start with. We'll take a look at the docs first. So let me make my browser a little bit bigger here. If you go to docs.mapbox.com, this is actually a really great way to get an overview of all of the different services that Mapbox provides. But you'll notice first on the list is maps. Is probably foundational to everything that we do. And then first on that list is Mapbox GL.js. So Mapbox GL is our JavaScript library. And that's what we're going to be working in today. But if you click in Mapbox GL.js, lots of documentation here. You can go through the full API reference. But the best place to get started is if you click on the examples. So each one of these examples, if you click on them, is actually a live functional web map, and you can see lots of different functionality being tried out and tested in each one of these. So I've always let people know this is probably the simplest place to get started, because each one contains a fully functional web page with a simple map in it that's exercising one thing or showing off one thing. So this first one, called Display a Globe on a Web Page, is a great place to start. And you can see this is an interactive globe, and we can move around, we can zoom in. So I'll zoom in on New York City, where I'm sitting right now. So if I'm using the scroll wheel to just zoom all the way in, and I can go down to sidewalk level and look at buildings if I wanted to. So lots of great information on this map. But if you scroll down below the working map, you actually have a whole bunch of code. And if you've done a little bit of web development before, you'll notice this is a full HTML document that we can just copy and paste. So how do we actually get that to be useful to us right now? We want to set up a local code project. So I'm going to actually create a new folder on my desktop. I'm just going to call it first map. And let's go over to a code editor like VS Code. And I'll drag this directory into the code editor. And the first thing I want to do here is make a new file called index.html. And this is an empty file, but I can write hello world in it. And before I go over back to the Mapbox example, I want to draw your attention to an extension for VS Code that I use called Live Server. If you just search for it here in the extensions bar, this is actually going to serve a live server for us and keep track of changes, so it'll hot reload. So this is already added in my environment here, but you should add it if you want to get started quickly. What it does is actually gives you this little go live button down here in the bottom. So right now I'm going to save this index.html that doesn't actually have any HTML in it. Let's make that a little bit bigger for you. And if we hit go live, we should see a web page open up in my browser that just says hello world. So now we're actually ready to use a Mapbox example. So like I said, back here on this display a globe on a web page example, if I copy and paste this code, I should get the entire working example that you see here. And we'll copy it and then we'll walk through the code a little bit and see what it's doing. So let's copy. And we'll go back to VS Code, paste. And as soon as I hit save, let's close the extensions, we should see. So I just reloaded the browser, and now this is actually running locally on my machine from that VS Code, and from this first map directory. So wonderful. I've got a globe on the page, and I can kind of do all the same things, but you'll notice if I reload, it's centered back over here over Europe. And the very first thing we want to do is take a look at some of this code and see if we can set up the initial view. So let's go and I'm going to hit format document to clean this up a little bit. So let's take a look at some of this JavaScript code. So first thing you'll notice is in the script tag here, there's only like 20 lines or so, but we have mapbox.gl.access token. And access token is important because that's how Mapbox keeps track of usage based on your accounts. So, we have a generous free tier, of course, so you can get started without any cost. But if your map takes off or you're building it into an app that gets a lot of usage, there are costs associated with it. So this is important. This is actually built in because I'm already signed into Mapbox, and it actually added it to the example. So that's a little like perk that's built into the example. If you're signed in, you don't need to copy and paste this. If you weren't signed into Mapbox and you copied and pasted the example, this would actually have some placeholder in it, and you would need to go get your access token, which is simple to do, but this saves some time. So sign up for your Mapbox account, and then you can copy and paste the examples. So let's get on to the code. So very simply, this little chunk of code right here is what instantiates the map, creates a new Mapbox GL map on the page. So there's a few options that we have to pass in here. So we're calling new Mapbox GL.map, and then we pass in this object of options. So the first one is container, and it's basically saying, where do you want to put the map? So when we have map here in quotes, it's actually saying, go find a div on the page whose ID is map, and that's what this is. So this is an empty div, and if you go further up in the example code, you'll see that this is styled to be a full screen div, and that's a kind of a pitfall that a lot of people may fall into, is inserting the map into a div that doesn't have any dimensions. So you want to make sure that that div has dimensions, and if you look up here in the CSS, you'll see that this is positioned absolutely. So top and bottom are 0, which makes it full height, and then width is 100%. So we have a full screen div called map, and then we tell Mapbox GL to use this container with ID map. The next things we want to set up are the style, zoom, center, and projection. So we'll skip style for now. We're going to come back to that. And then in center and zoom are fairly straightforward. So if you haven't done web mapping work before, zoom levels range from low level zoom, which means you're zoomed out, seeing the entire world, all the way to high zooms, which would be maybe around 19 or 20 zoom level, which will get you down to like sidewalk level. So for example, if I wanted to zoom in to a city, I might switch this to zoom level 10, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. And then for the center point, this is just a longitude and a latitude. So you'll hear people say lat long a lot, but long lat is the order that they need to be in, which is basically the same as XY order. And so this is just a longitude 30, latitude 50. And what I like to do is I like to pull up this bboxfinder.com. which is a nice little tool that can help you just quickly get some coordinates. So this is another a thing that's in my spatial developer toolkit. So for example, if I wanted to zoom in on New York, I'm going to position these crosshairs in the middle of the screen over New York. And then I get a longitude, latitude that I can copy down here in the bottom of the page. So I'll go back to my code and just replace 3050 with, what did I copy? Did that not work? Hold on, let me go copy that again. Yeah, negative 73.950863, comma 40.734917, and zoom level 10. So let's take a look at the map and see where that gets us. So now we're zoomed in over New York. And you can kind of tweak that a little bit. So if I wanted to try out zoom level 9, I can save and reload. You can see we're zoomed out a little bit more. I could do zoom level 20 to show you just how far in 20 is. And now we're looking at some street that I'm not familiar with in the middle of New York City. But let's go back to city level. So maybe do 11. Good. So, you can tinker around with these and play around and get the map looking however you'd like it to look. So lastly, we have projection, which is set to globe, and the globe projection is what makes it so that it turns into a globe once you get out below zoom level 6, which looks great. And then very last, we have style. So this is important. And you can see here that this is called Satellite Streets V11. We have a URL that starts with mapbox://. Looks, looks like a kind of funny URL because it starts with Mapbox, but basically this is telling Mapbox to go grab a predefined core style. So I want to take a quick second to go look at this page, which is on the docs. If you go to docs.mapbox.com/API/maps/styles, you'll see a whole bunch of core styles listed here. So these are kind of the curated, ready to use, professionally designed styles that Mapbox designers have worked on. So each one of these is actually bringing in a ton of data. So all the data that you need for drawing every street and every coastline is all included in behind these. But most importantly, it's the actual details of how they get rendered on the map. So we were looking at one called Satellite Streets, which is built into the code snippet we copied before, but we can try out another one of these. So light and dark are very popular, especially if you're going to be presenting data and you want your data to pop out. These are more subdued. So I can copy the URL for light, for example, and let's go paste that in here. So we're changing the style and saying, don't load satellite streets, load light. Let's save that and see what we get. So this is the light style. You can see it's much more subdued. The labels, the labels jump out, but the streets and the land masses are very, they're a lighter shade. So you can imagine if we put some colored data on top of this, it'll really stand out. Likewise, we also have the dark style. Let's copy that. I'll show you what that looks like. So you have control over this, and what we're actually going to get to in later episodes is that you can actually make your own styles. That's a whole other thing that Mapbox developers do, is go into our Mapbox Studio tool and create their own styles. So you have complete control over, you could have this, and you could have it look exactly like this dark map, but you may want to make the, certain labels be different colors, or you might want to change the color of the water. So that's something powerful that you can do later. But for now, we can start with these core styles. So I like the dark style. So I'm going to leave it like that. But that's all there is to it to modify this example. Wonderful. So the next thing we want to do is we set our center and zoom. We tried out some different core styles. So we found, we picked one that we like. And next we can move on to adding markers. So most of the time, people who are using Mapbox GL are going to bring in, more robust data. So you might have a large data set that you need to serve, and we have Mapbox tiling service which can help you, load and ETL that data and serve it up immediately for use in the map. You can also load GeoJSON data, which we're going to do in probably the next episode of this webinar. But the simplest thing to do is add markers, and instead of loading a data file, you can actually like hard code a marker in your JavaScript, because all you need to display a marker is really a latitude and longitude, and then maybe some other configuration options. So it's a great way to get started. And sometimes, that it depends on what you're building, but that may be all you need is to put markers on the map. So I'm going to go back to the docs and let's search for, let's go to Mapbox GL. Let's see if we can find the marker documentation. Actually, sorry, let's skip that. We're going to go back to examples because there's a good marker example here. Okay, so there's an example here called add a default marker to a web map. And let's click on that. And just like the other example we started with, this is a functional web map that I can zoom and scroll. And we have full code underneath it for an entire web page, like we had before. So we don't need all of this because we already have a functioning example with a map on it. But we do have some snippets down here that are actually doing the marker. So we'll start with this and then we'll go check out the docs later because we want to expand upon it. But pretty straightforward. We say const marker 1, so we're making a new variable. We say new Mapbox GL marker. And we call set long lat and pass in a longitude and latitude as an array. And then we call add to map. So we can actually repeat this as many times as we need for the markers. And we actually don't need to assign a variable. So I'm just going to copy this chunk. And let's go put that into our code. So I'm going to format this a little bit, and this should be all we need. So this is going to add, so I copied this directly from the example. I haven't updated the long lat, but just to see if it works, I want to save this and reload my map, and we'll see if there's a marker on it at this location. So obviously no marker in New York, but if we zoom all the way out and find some other part of the world that this example was created on, we should see a marker. So there's our marker in Copenhagen. And now we want to move that marker somewhere that is within our initial view. So let's go back to my friend Bbox Finder. And I'm going to put this marker, let's put it in Central Park. So I'll line up these crosshairs on Central Park. I'm going to copy this long lat. Go back to my code. And here we're saying add a new marker. And I'm just going to update those coordinates. I'm going to say, in my comments here, I'll just add a note that says add a marker in Central Park. Wonderful. Okay, so let's save that and go see our marker in Central Park. All right, so this is great. So this is the default marker. For those of you who are curious, most of the map is being rendered here in WebGL using Mapbox GL. But the markers, if you just use the default if you use the markers built into Mapbox GL, they're actually separate from the GL or from the canvas, and they're actually just HTML elements on top of the canvas. So when we move around, it's kind of repositioning that. Doesn't really do anything. So that's what we're actually going to look at next, is how can we add some basic interactivity. FYI, which I think I didn't cover before, but one of the great things about Mapbox GL is that you're not limited to north up, and you can also do incremental zooms. So I'm actually holding down the control key on my computer right now, and I can actually switch the pitch and bearing of the map. So sometimes it's helpful to to have the map start in not having north up. So for example, if I wanted to show a chunk of New York City here and line it up with the grid instead of with north, it all depends on your use case, but you have that kind of control. So those are just other options you pass in to when you initialize the map. If I reload, it'll go back to normal. That's fine. I just wanted to show that this is possible. Okay, so we've got a marker. Let's go take a look at another example. And let's try and add a pop-up to this marker. So I'm going to search for pop-up. So most of the basic things you want to do with Mapbox GL, there's probably a good example. So attach a pop-up to a marker instance. So yes, we have a marker instance already. Let's click on this example. Same thing we did before. Actually, before I go to the code, we'll just click on it and see what it does. So if I click on this image marker, so this is not a default marker. It's actually a HTML element with an image. It has this pop-up. So if I click on it, the pop-up opens. I can also click the little X to dismiss the pop-up, and this will actually get us pretty far. So I'm going to scroll down in the code here. And we should see some familiar code. So this looks like what we already just did is add a new mapboxgl.marker. But up here we have we're creating a pop-up and saving it as a variable called pop-up. And then importantly, so this code defines the pop-up, and then down here we call this set pop-up method, which actually connects the pop-up to the marker. So this will get us pretty far. So let's start with this, and then we'll just remember this set pop-up that we need to call, and we'll go back to our code. So we should set up, or we should set up this pop-up before we add it to the marker. So I copied and pasted that. That's pretty much all I need to do. And then down here, remember there was a set pop-up method, and we'll take that variable pop-up and pass it into set pop-up. And now our marker in Central Park should have a nice pop-up over it. Let's go take a look. So here's our marker, and we can click on it and we get a useful message about the Washington Monument. So that's not very helpful, but we can go through and just change this string. So we're calling set text on the pop-up, and then we can change that text to whatever we want. So we can say Central Park. And let's go back, check out the code, or check out the live site. And now we've got Central Park. So you can add whatever string you wanted to that. And yeah, that's enough to get us going. So a couple other things we might want to do here to try out some other options. So we called we set up mapbox.gl.marker, but we didn't actually pass in any options. So there's just an empty call to this method here. But we can actually pass in options here. So let's go take a look at the docs and see what we can find about markers. So let's go to mapbox.gl.js, and let's go to API reference. And there's a link here right at the top index called markers and controls. And let's take a quick look at, so this is the attribution control. We don't need that. Full screen control. All these things are things you can add to your map. There's also a geolocation control, which will locate your user using their browser or their device. So we don't want those, we want marker. So I'm going to click marker over here. All right, so this tells us all the things we can do with a marker. So we instantiated marker, and we were supposed to pass in an options object, which is optional. So we didn't, but if we wanted to, these are all the different options we have. So simplest, to use might be color. So we can change the color of the marker because it's just an HTML element, and we can just quickly add any HTML color to it. There's also offset, which would move it away from the point. We also have scale. So I think scale and color might be ones that we can mess with quickly. Some people find this marker to be kind of big, and if you had 100 of them or 50 of them on the screen, they kind of can overlap each other depending on how spaced apart they are. So scale might be a good idea. So color is just a hex color, so I can pass that in quickly. I'll remember that. And then scale, it looks like it's a number. And actually it doesn't tell us much here about which other sizes we can use. So we're going to try scaling it down. So we'll do if the default is 1, let's make it 60% of the size. So we'll try 0.6. So let's do that. So under marker, we've got color. So we can add HTML named colors, or we can add a hex color. I'll go get a hex color in a moment here. And then let's do scale 0.6. Let's go find us a color. So we'll just say HTML color picker. And let's grab a nice neon green and copy that hex color. So that needs to be a string. We need a comma for our object, and this should be good to go. All right, let's go look at our marker now. So it is smaller now because we scaled down, and it's also green. So that's an example of just passing in some options. There's plenty more you can do. Let's make it really tiny. Let's see what 0.2 looks like. Ooh, it's tiny. Hard to click on, but you get the idea. So let's do 0.6. Okay, so that's that. So we have a functional marker with a pop-up here. And what I would like to show next, because we've added this, we've added a pop-up, we've added a marker. I could literally copy and paste the pop-up and the marker code and just repeat it as many times as I want to. But for the heck of it, I think, it might be helpful to actually just make a little loop and add some data to this, so we can actually use the same code. So we can add this, we can recycle this code to actually create multiple markers. And the first thing I want to do is make some data. So I'm going to say const. Actually, let's move this a little higher in the code. So I'm gonna hard code some data here. I'm gonna say const boroughs of New York City, and then that'll be an array of objects. And then I'm going to craft some data that we can use to generate markers. So I'm going to need 5 of these. Actually, let's just make one first and then we'll copy it. So inside of this, I'm crafting my own data here. So we'll just call this, each borough should have a name, which would be, for example, Brooklyn. And it will have a color, which, we'll just assign some random colors here. We just want to make them show up differently. The point is I'm trying to show how to make sort of data-driven markers here. That's enough to actually get started with. Oh, they also need, of course, a long lat. And actually, these don't need quotes. So let's get rid of those. So we got name, color, and long lat. So let's go actually get long lat for Brooklyn. So if I want to put this, central to Brooklyn, there-ish. So let's copy that long lat. Okay, so this is one object for my boroughs. So let's copy this 4 more times. And we'll change these out. So we'll say Manhattan, we'll say Queens, and we'll say Staten Island, and then we will say the Bronx. And it looks like I'm missing some commas here. Okay, so we're crafting data by hand, and of course these are arrays, so they actually need to be in square brackets. Let's do that. Okay, so I'll come back in and do the colors in a moment, but let's get moving on the code. So what I want to do here is a for each. So we'll do a boroughs.for each. And then I'll unpack the 2 variables from each one of the boroughs. So we'll say name and long lat. And what did I forget to do? I forgot to actually update the long lats for these. So let's do that really quickly. Okay, so we did Brooklyn. Let's go back and get Manhattan. We'll find, well, Central Park is already a pretty good long lat for that. So there's Manhattan. And let's go get Queens up here. Let's copy that. Okay, so crafting my spatial data. Let's get Staten Island down here. And let's get the Bronx up here. Okay, so we have all of our long lats. So each of these has a name. Each of these has a coordinate, a long lat coordinate associated with it. So as we loop through each one, we just want to do our same code that we did down here. So pop up and marker. So I'm actually going to comment. I'm going to copy these, comment them out. So we won't be doing the Central Park marker anymore. And then in here, let's clean this up a little bit. Okay. So same code, but instead of the word Central Park in the pop-up, when we set text, we're just going to set text to name. So it's going to pull the name out of our data, out of our array of objects. And then down here, let's skip color for now. We'll come back to that. And then when we set the long lat, instead of hard coding it here, we're actually going to use the long lat variable from our data. So if this works, we should see 5 markers on the map, 1 for each borough in the positions that we just showed. And there they are. So that's wonderful. And then last but not least, let's do some more data-driven styling on these and say, we want to pull out a color variable out of the data. And so I left these as empty strings, but let's just go get a bunch of random colors. So I'll start with green. Let's get that. So Brooklyn will be green. Let's do purple. And set that for Manhattan. Let's do this orange and set that for Queens. And then let's get a dark blue for Staten Island. And last but not least, let's do a yellow for the Bronx. And I have the data defined, but I'm not actually using it anywhere. So when we call Mapbox GL marker, we'll pass in a variable instead of a hard-coded color, and that will be, so let's unpack color from the borough object and then paste it in here. So color is equal to color. Actually, we can just abbreviate that this way because they're the same name. And let's see what we get. All right, so did I use green twice? I guess I did. Maybe not. Manhattan. Yeah, they're the same color. Okay, doesn't matter. So I won't spend any more time correcting it. But yeah, this looks great. So we've got a functional map here. So you can imagine, if we had even more data, we could just loop over that as many times as we need to. Probably not, thousands of times, but a few hundred markers will probably be fine. If I click on each one of these, I get a nice little pop-up. If I click on another one, it closes the open pop-up and opens the one that I was, most interested in. So if you can imagine here that, this is a very rudimentary example, but with just that little bit of JavaScript code, you can actually build a useful map if you have the right data and you just want to draw attention to certain locations. So again, this is just the very beginning. We're just scratching the surface here. What we want to add, we would want to add like a legend or a title or that sort of thing. But it all depends on what you're after. So this is just kind of the basics of using the tools. So I think that's what we have on the agenda for today. So let's go. Let me show a quick slide for what we're going to cover in the next session, and then I can move over to some Q&A. Oh yeah, so here are the styles I showed you. So you should definitely check out. So remember, light and dark are useful for for overlaying data. So like you see, I have these colorful markers that stand out really well. You can imagine they wouldn't stand out as well if we were using the streets. So streets is actually great for navigation. It's probably more similar to the maps you may have up when you're navigating on foot or in a vehicle. So they call out a lot more attention to street features and highways and things like that. We also have outdoors, which will have contour lines on it, and useful for if you're building like a hiking app or whatever, something that people need to be outdoors a lot more and care more about terrain and that sort of thing. And then we also have satellite imagery, so you can have just the satellite imagery, or you can have a hybrid where there's satellite imagery with like a street overlay. So it's got good labels, everything on top of it. So lots of different options there when it comes to the styles. So next week, so we set up this basic map with markers. Next week, we're going to add some GeoJSON data. So GeoJSON, if you're not familiar with it, is a web-friendly data format. It's just an opinionated arrangement of JSON or a standard. So once you get your data into GeoJSON, it can play well with Mapbox GL, and we can bring that in as a layer. So we're going to do that. We're going to understand sources and layers. So these are just core concepts you need to be aware of if you're going to be interacting with a Mapbox GL map. We're going to add some data-dependent styling, similar to what we did with the markers, but using the styling language or the styling specification for Mapbox GL. And then we're going to get some features on hover, which is the beginning of interactivity. So that's what we'll cover next week. And right now, I will move on to some questions. So give me just a moment. Let me go take a look at what's going on in the questions section. Okay. Let me stop Let me stop presenting this presentation. And we'll go back to my very simple map and ask, okay, so here's a couple questions. One, so someone asked, is there an option to replace the hard-coded long lat values to always center to where the person viewing the map is located? For sure. So, I mean, if you go back to the code, it depends on what you mean by that. If you mean you want to center on their location once, like when the map first loads, all you would have to do is pass in a different set of coordinates here for the center point. So this is the center point when the map first loads. And as long as you can get access to that coordinate before you call this code, you can center it on that person's location. So that you can actually get, there's ways to pull that out of the web browser. So yeah, I think by whatever means necessary, if you get that location, you can pass it in here. You can also instantiate the map, looking at planet Earth and then like zoom in on the person's location once you get that. So if you have to load the map first and then get their location afterwards, that's fine too. You can actually do something called map.setCenter, and then you can call this at any time later on, and it'll actually animate the map to that location. So you would just pass in the long lat here as an array. Okay, so that was first question. Second question I see in my document here. In the pop-up example, when instantiating the marker, a DOM element is passed as the entire options object. Does Mapbox just detect this as a DOM element and set it equal to options.element? Yes, I believe so. So what they're saying here is you can actually, instead of passing in a full options object, you can pass in L, and as long as I've defined L beforehand, you can actually create a new element, and this is how you basically make a marker out of any HTML element. So if you check out the examples, you'll see that happening. And then you can pass it in like that, but without the rest of the options. But you can also pass it in with L equals my element, or whatever element you created outside of this code. So there's a couple different options there. But yeah, I would encourage you to go check out the examples. So yeah, this is actually the example. It's got a good, so const L equals document.create element div, L.id equals marker. So you can add an ID and style it however you want to, and then you just pass that in. So yeah, if you pass it in like this, then you're basically saying, I don't want to add any other options. So it's totally up to you. Okay, let's take a look. More questions. With satellite imagery, what is the source of it and how often does it get updated? So, I mean, we have an entire team that works on data processing, and a subset of that team that works exclusively on rasters. So I can't answer what is the source of it directly, because there's like many different sources and they're constantly being moved together. So not something I can give a quick answer on now, just that there are lots of different sources concatenated together to make a high quality satellite imagery data set. How often does it get updated? I believe that is extremely frequently, like multiple times per day. But I'll follow up with that during the next session and get you a better answer on just how often that actually takes place. Quick question. I usually need the geometry of cities, countries, etc. What's the best GIS database for that? Or is there a platform service app to get GeoJSON? So Mapbox actually has a boundaries data set, which we curate and make available to our customers. It is something you have to it's a paid product actually, but that's an option too if you're interested in it. I mean, I think Natural Earth is probably a good candidate for getting those geometries. You might also check out OpenStreetMap. So if you're just looking for good data sets with borders and things like that, those are two options: OSM and Natural Earth. I think, yeah. So I think that's all the questions we have. So we're at about 42 minutes here. So if we don't have any additional questions coming from the stream, I think we can, sign off for today, and we will hopefully see you at the next one. So I really appreciate you spending some time with me today, and hope that you have enough now, just after seeing me use a couple of these examples, to go check out the rest of the examples, find some things that you're excited about, and give this a try. So whatever you do, also, we would love to hear about it. So best way to do that right now is Twitter. So maybe tag Mapbox or even tag me and just share code snippet, share working code. We didn't publish this to the internet or anything, so it's not live. But maybe we can cover that in future sessions too, is how to quickly get this code onto like GitHub pages or Netlify or something like that. So I think that'll be it, and we'll end this with a nice splash screen. And thank you for tuning in today. Take care.